Today is, yes.
Yeah, 18th.
Okay. Today is December 18th, 2001. We're interviewing Mr. Joseph H. Markey at Latham headquarters, Michael Akey, interviewer, Wayne Clark, videographer. Mr. Markey, where were you born?
Seattle, Washington.
Seattle, Washington. Okay. Did you grow up in Seattle?
Well, I grew up in that part of the country, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you went to school there?
Yeah. Yeah, not in Seattle.
Not in Seattle?
Yeah, I was raised on, well, from the time I was in 6th grade, I was raised on Bainbridge Island, which is an island in Puget Sound. It's,
okay. You went to high school in Bainbridge?
I just graduated.
What was it like there?
Well, at the time, Bainbridge Island is about 8 miles from Seattle, out in the Sound. At the time, Bainbridge Island was a thinly populated rural area, you know, country. It took about an hour to get there by ferry. About 30% of my high school class were Japanese American children of mostly farmers who lived on the island. Yeah. But now Bainbridge Island is a real upscale suburb of Seattle. I couldn't afford to live there anymore.
I'm sure most of the natives couldn't.
That's right. That's right.
And what year did you graduate from high school?
1943.
1943. Let's just go back a little bit. Pearl Harbor. Do you remember where you were when?
Yeah, oh yeah.
What happened?
Well, I was out in the backyard of our house chopping wood. We used wood mostly for fuel, for heating and cooking in our house. Most of the people did in those days, in that time. So I was out in the backyard chopping wood, and my mother came to the back porch and said, "Come on in and listen to the radio. The Japs are bombing Pearl Harbor," you know, and that was it.
But, now, I'm kind of curious. Pearl Harbor was attacked. You're in high school at that point. What were the feelings towards your Japanese-American classmates?
Oh, we, by that time they had, let's see now. Well, at the time they were just regular guys, you know. I mean, we didn't have any racial prejudice or anything like that. They were, you know, they were our buddies, and just like any other classmate.
Even after the attack?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We knew that they were okay. Yeah.
Were any of those people sent into camps?
All of them.
When did that happen?
That happened, I'm trying to remember. I think it was about, well, it was probably less than a year later.
Okay. How did you feel about that?
Terrible. We thought it was an absolute outrage.
The whole community, pretty much?
Well, no, not the whole community. There were some who, you know, right from the time of Pearl Harbor were saying, oh, you know, we can't trust the Japs. We got to get them out of here. They might be saboteurs, you know, all that shit. Most of the people, though, didn't believe that, you know. And the way that they were taken away was just terrible, you know. Most of them lost everything.
Really?
Most of them lost everything.
So they were basically just yanked out of their lives?
Yanked out of their lives, and as I say, most of them never got back. Yeah. Today there's probably, on Bainbridge Island, there's probably less than 5% of the ones who, you know, descendants of the ones who live there.
Did you keep track of any of your friends that?
Yeah. Up until the time I went into the service, which was a few weeks after graduating from high school, you know, we would write letters, and they would write letters to us, and we would, you know, pass them around at school, that sort of thing. And then after I went to the service, of course, it got a whole lot more difficult to do that. But even then, once in a great while, I would get a letter, or somebody from home would forward me a letter or something like that. And after the war, this is a little later part of the story, but I started going to the University of Washington on the GI Bill, and there were a couple of them there, including one guy who had been a classmate of mine. And we only had about 15 boys in our high school class, so it was, pretty, pretty close. And a real, how should I say it, small world kind of a thing was that years later, probably 1952 or 3, when I came to work for GE in Schenectady, by God, there's a guy there, a Japanese-American guy, who had been in a class in front of me in little Bainbridge High School,
Small world.
Yeah.
Small world. Now, you graduated in 43. Did you know you were going to go in?
Oh yeah, well, I tell you, at least in my circle, even before Pearl Harbor, there was a definite military presence, because that's only a short ways from the Puget Sound Navy Yard, which was a big Navy yard even then, and indeed had already had a couple of damaged British ships had come in there to be repaired. One of them was the battleship Warspite, the British battleship Warspite.
Oh, really?
Had been brought into Puget Sound Navy Yard for repairs, and there were shipbuilding yards. In fact, there was a building yard on the island, a small one, built minesweepers during the war. And so, for several years prior to that, there had been a definite, obvious build-up, and practically all of this was Navy activity in that area. And, so we followed the news probably a little closer than most, I guess, I don't know. And I think most people figured that war was inevitable, and that when our country got into the war, we would be in it as quick as we got old enough, which it did indeed turn out to be the case. So there was no surprise that way.
Was going into the Navy a foregone conclusion?
Yeah.
Why'd you pick the Navy?
Well, of course, I'd been raised on an island, around boats and on the water and so forth. And, I figured, what the heck, on board of a ship, you always got a dry place to sleep and 3 meals a day, and you don't have to slog around in the mud and stuff like that. So that was a factor,
Right, right. Where did you do your basic training?
Well, I had a rather unusual situation. I was a good student in high school, and I took some tests, and I was accepted for what was called the V-12 program, which is a Navy Officers Training Program.
Oh, okay. How was that supposed to work?
Well, what it was, there were several of these V programs, V5, V12, whatnot, but the one I was in was you were sent to a regular university for accelerated training in engineering, and also naval training along with it, and physical training and the whole thing. And you're supposed to finish that whole thing in, I think, about 2.5 or 3 years. And then, if you survived the training, which probably not more than half did, then you got commissioned as a naval officer, as an ensign. So that was the program that I went into, and I was assigned to the University of Minnesota. Who knows why? But I went there. I went into active duty, I think it was June 1st, 1943. It was just a few weeks after graduating from high school. And I went to the University of Minnesota and started this program, which was indeed very rigorous, but after a couple of months, I could see that I was not academically prepared. I wasn't going to be able to make the grades, because a lot of the students had already had a year or 2 or even 3 years of engineering education, see, in a college level education. There were not very many that were right out of high school. And the high school that I was at, a poor rural high school, we didn't have the advanced classes. I'd never studied calculus, for example, which I hardly even knew what it was. And practically all of my contemporaries already had a year or two of calculus. And, you know, that's just an example. So I didn't actually flunk out, but I was gradually sliding down toward the precipice, you know. And I decided, what the hell, this is not what I want to do anyway. I said, you know, I wanted to, you know, fight for my country, join the Navy, see the world, go to sea, you know, have adventures, you know, 18 years old. You know.
Was this your first time away from home?
No, I had been away, I had spent 2 summers away from home before that. But anyway, I went to the commanding officer there at the University of Minnesota and said, look, I want out. And he asked me why, and I told him what I just about told you. He said, fine, we'll take care of that. Gone, you know, to Great Lakes Naval Training Center, which of course is a huge, gigantic boot camp. Nobody from our part of the country ever got sent to Great Lakes, but I ended up at Great Lakes because of that situation. And so I finished Great Lakes just before Christmas of 1943. And I got a couple of weeks leave, and I went home on the train and back, you know. And then I was sent to, I had passed tests and so forth in Great Lakes, and I was sent to diesel engine technicians training school, 12 weeks diesel school. And that was located on Navy Pier in Chicago. See, I don't know if you're familiar with the Navy Pier, but that's what it is. It's a gigantic, huge pier, sticks out in Lake Michigan, which was totally frozen as far as the eye could see at that time of the year. You know, I thought, oh, shit, this is like being in the Arctic, you know. But they had the school there. It was an excellent school. It had been a commercial school before the war, been taken over by the Navy for that purpose. And they had barracks and mess halls, and you know, you never had to leave the pier. we would get a day off on rare occasions, but I went through that diesel school, and it was 12 weeks. And
good training?
Yeah, excellent, as I later came to appreciate. And the top 10% of the class got third class petty officer rating. Motor machinist made third class, which I did. I was one of the 10%. I felt pretty good about that because I was a kid out of high school. No, you know, actual, you know, training of that sort. And a lot of the guys there had made their living as diesel engine mechanics. You know, they'd worked in truck garages and stuff like that, you know, and powerhouses. And so I figured, hell, if I'm in the top 10% of that bunch, I felt pretty good. See?
Sure.
So I did. And near the end of the diesel school, they asked, you know, they interviewed people and tried to figure out their future assignments, and they asked for volunteers, and I volunteered for submarine service. And
why did you want to go on a submarine?
Well, by that time I appreciated that as far as the equipment was concerned, this all had to do with the machinery in the diesel school and the whole. I discovered that I was pretty mechanically inclined, you know. And you know, as far as diesel equipment and all the related stuff goes, submarines by far the most sophisticated equipment of that type.
Right. So
that was an attraction. I wanted to work on the biggest and the best, you know. And of course the submarine service is an elite service. They got extra pay, they got, you know, it's just an elite thing, you know.
And that appealed to you?
Yeah, sure. And at the time, you know, the war was on, and submarines were really making a killing, you know. They were, I didn't realize until later they were also having about the highest casualty rate of anybody in the Navy, but that didn't bother me, you know, at that age. You figure it's okay. So anyway, I did my interview and all that, and after the school, when it ended, they would, I can't remember the terminology, but they would post lists of, they would start shipping guys out to their assignments, and they would post drafts, they called them drafts. And there would be a bullet on the bulletin board, say a draft of these 30 guys are going to go to so-and-so, and a draft of this number of 12 guys are going to go to so-and-so. And sure enough, my name appeared on a draft going to New London, Connecticut, see, which is where the submarine school is. So I thought, oh man, this is great, And there was only about 6 of us, I guess. And so we went by train to New London and got there, and the guy said, well, I can't remember the exact circumstances, but I was being interviewed by some officer. He said, well, you're not here to go to submarine school. You weren't assigned to the submarine school. You're assigned to the base itself, to be one of the permanent guys on the base. And I was assigned to what was called the boat shop, which sort of corresponds to a motor pool, I guess, in an Army organization. They had all kinds of small craft on the base, They had a fireboat, and they had a couple of admiral's barges, and they had 2 or 3 tugs, and they had, I don't know, probably about 20 or 25 small craft of various kinds, which included 6 torpedo retrievers. And these torpedo retrievers are about like a modern lobster boat, fast, powerful diesel engines in them. And of course, New London's a big base for commissioning new submarines at the time. There are new submarines. The electric boat shipyard is just down a couple of miles down the river, And so the newly constructed submarines would come to New London, and they would get their crews on, and then they would go out and start practicing out in Block Island Sound, Long Island Sound. And among other things, they would fire practice torpedoes. And the practice torpedoes are fixed so that when they stop running, they float. And the torpedo retriever does, guess what? Chases after the torpedoes and puts the line on them and hauls them over to a tugboat, so they take them back to the base and use them over and over and over again, see? So one of the great things about this boat shop was that we had a very complete shop where we took care of all of the mechanical work on all these boats, rebuilt engines, did everything of that sort. But also, any boat that needed an engineer as a crew guy, it was like a pool, Okay. And you'd go to work in the morning and it'd say, okay, today you're going to be the engineer on torpedo retriever number 4, kind of. So you went down there and you spent the day doing that, see, and it was really fun.
A lot of variety.
Oh man, yeah, something new every day, and out on the water and tearing around, lots of liberty, going ashore at New London,
So your disappointment for being on a submarine didn't
yeah,
last too long?
that's right, and especially when I saw what the guys in the submarine school were doing, which was, right there. That was another one of the huge activities was the submarine school itself. And man, they had a tough life, and so I didn't feel too bad about that, So, so I spent the whole summer of that would be the summer of 1944, I guess. I guess I got there probably about March or so, and I spent the spring and summer living the high life of New London. But along in the fall, I decided this is a racket. This is something for some old married guy that's, can't afford to be away from his wife and children and so on. I said, "Oh, this." I said, the war's going to be over before I do anything at all except chase torpedoes. So once again, I went to the commanding officer, not the officer, but the head guy at the boat shop, and I said, I want to see some action. He said, "What?" He said, "You're going to give up this soft duty and you want to, he said, boy, he said, if I take you up on this, I'm telling you, you're going to be gone, you know. I said, that's what I want. He said, sold, you know. So, boy, next week, on a train, see, on a train to San Francisco, and then on the aircraft carrier Saratoga as a passenger. Saratoga had been torpedoed. Had been in the shipyards for many months, really seriously damaged. And it was just returning into active service, and it was heading, you know, west. And so between San Francisco and Pearl Harbor, it was like a huge cargo ship. It was packed with passengers. replenishment, see? Excuse me. And this time, the Sperry had not been back to the States since it was commissioned, I think about, well, right around the 1st of 1942. I've been working continually all that time without any without ever being in a shipyard. So the deal was this time, instead of going back to Pearl Harbor to be replenished, it was going back to the States. See? And of course there's thousands and thousands of guys who have not been back to the States in a long time. I'd only been out 6 months, 6 or 7 months. So right away, so you're not going back to the States, you know, and you're going to be transferred to some other ship, and we'll get some guys
Right.
that, you know, which, you know, that was only fair. I didn't feel bad about that at all. So it happened that part of the squadron there was another ship which I was only vaguely aware of up until that point, and it was a submarine rescue vessel called the Greenlet. And it was based right there, as I say, it was part of the squadron. And so the deal was that myself and 4 or 5 other engine room type guys off of the Sperry were going to be put on the Greenlet and replace guys who had been on her for a long, long time, and they were going on the Sperry and they were going back to the States. So that's what happened. So I got transferred to the Greenlet.
Well, what's the mission of this vessel?
Well, the Greenlet is, and there were, the Navy had during the war about 10 or a dozen of these submarine rescue vessels, of which 6 were built for the purpose, and they were the biggest and the best, see? And the Greenlet was one of them, see. And they're like a big, well, they were in fact identical to the biggest seagoing tugs that the Navy had, but they had an extra machinery space in them. They're about 20 feet longer. They had an extra machinery space in them, which was full of air compressor equipment. And they were built to rescue people from sunken submarines. See? So they had all this air compressor equipment. They had these big rescue diving bell things. I don't know if you've heard of them. They had one of those and all the equipment that it takes to function with that. And they had 2 big decompression chambers in them, because so that the divers coming up from deep water, you know, they can put them in there and they don't get the bends. You know, so that extra 20 feet of length was taken up with that added equipment that a tug doesn't have. See? And so that was their mission, was to rescue guys from sunken submarines, which of course in wartime in the Pacific is a total joke, and everybody knew it, you know. They never rescued anybody, never had a chance. But they were there, partly as a morale booster, I guess, you know. But they made themselves useful by doing training stuff, not unlike what we had done in New London. It was somewhat the same deal. When a submarine has completed its replenishment on the tender and is now ready to go out on a war patrol, they have to spend at least a couple of days in practice, because first of all, you got new crew members that have to be sort of worked into the routine, and in addition, the trim of a submarine is very, very critical. The way it responds to the diving and the surfacing and all that stuff. And when you've unloaded all of the supplies and put on a bunch of new supplies and shifted everything around during this replenishment thing, it takes a while to figure out how she's going to respond now when you do, crash dives and battle surface maneuvers and really rigorous maneuvers of that type. You got to make sure you understand how she's going to. So anyway, they would spend a couple of days in doing just that. We'd sail out of the harbor, accompanied by the Greenlet, see, and go out there, and they would you know, practice diving and surfacing, and then after a while they would practice battle surface where they, you know, charge up and run out and man the deck guns and shoot at a target, which we would be towing, see? And we would hope they would hit pretty close to the target and not us, you know. And they would fire practice torpedoes, just like back on Long Island Sound. And only this time the Greenlet, instead of a torpedo retriever, would go retrieve them. And so that was our routine, day after day.
Now, the Greenlet is a much smaller ship.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
how's living on a much smaller ship different?
It was a difficult transition for me and for most of the guys who came off of the Sperry. First of all, the Sperry is a big ship, and it's anchored in the middle of a harbor, and it doesn't rock and roll, see. The Greenlet, on the other hand, anchors right out near the mouth of the harbor, so it can come and go every morning and night and do its thing, where it's rough. And then when you get out in the, you know, in Guam, when you get out of the harbor, you're in the open ocean. I mean, it's a big ocean, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always rough, see. And so you know, I never did, but a lot of the guys would get seasick, and you know, until they got used to it, you see. And there's that constant motion, even when you're trying to sleep at night, the ship is rolling and pitching. So there's that. And the food probably is not quite as good because it's more difficult to get supplies and so forth. The thing was...
This second, we're going to change tapes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Rolling.
You don't usually see.
Yeah, okay. Well, one of the guys who came from the Sperry to the Greenlet with me was an old chief. I considered him old. He was probably 45 years old, but he was he was over 20 years in the Navy, all the time in submarines. But now he was too old for that. And he and I, as it happened, went down in the engine room together for the first time. We went down there, and we went down there, and we looked around, and he said, "Joe, we came from a palace into a shit house." And it was. God, you know, by our standards, the thing was a wreck. You know, unlike the crew of the Sperry, not very many of these guys were ex-submarine guys. They were, you know, in our view, they were second-class sailors, most of them. And the officer, the captain at the time, you know. Anyway, the ship was run down. It was in poor condition. It didn't have, it wasn't up to the standards we were used to. And so that was tough at first. After a while, though, we got a new captain, ex-submarine captain. We got a couple of other new officers. We got some new chiefs. We got a couple more guys off of the Sperry before she left. And within about 2 or 3 months, we kind of took over, and the Greenlet began to improve, you know. Mm-hmm. And we brought her back pretty good.
Did you ever get caught in any serious weather?
Yeah, we got caught in, well, while we were at Guam, we got caught in the tail end of a typhoon, you know. It was a really big one. I don't know why we were out there. I guess they misread the weather or something.
Now, were you on the Greenlet at that
Yeah,
time?
this was on the Greenlet, yeah. Oh yeah, it was scary. I mean, you know, it was really, but, you know, we had no damage or nothing like that. We rode it out all right.
Did you ever cross the equator?
No, never went across the equator. Spent 20 months, I think, west of the international date line, but never went across the equator. But anyway, and then we were on another typhoon later on our way to Japan at the end of the war. Well, anyway, that's the way things were on the Greenlet Sea. And number of months went by. I can't remember the dates exactly. I could look them up though. But then I remember when President Roosevelt died. You know,
Oh.
that was when we were still on the Sperry. You know?
What was the feeling at that point?
Shocked. Most of the guys couldn't remember.
This is the only president you really know. Okay.
Well, anyway, getting back to the typhoon now. An interesting incident. I don't know, I don't want to take up too much time here. But an interesting incident happened, I think it was the same typhoon, I'm not sure. But there was a huge typhoon that struck Okinawa. You may have heard of that, and there was a lot of ships damaged and whatnot. One of the most spectacular incidents that happened up by Okinawa was that the heavy cruiser Pittsburgh had its bow broken off. Did you ever hear about that?
I think so.
Yeah, you know, it's a heavy cruiser. It's a big, strong ship, you know, and the whole goddamn bow of the thing broke off, see? And both halves stayed afloat. And the bow, I don't know what happened to the main part, but the bow was towed to Guam. And I can remember it was in the harbor at Guam. It was a damn, you know, it was the pointy part was sticking straight up in the air.
Must have been quite a sight.
It was a really, really strange sight, you know, and we were all marveling at that. Anyway, I don't remember whether it was the tail end of that same typhoon or whether it was a different one that we got caught in, but it was that. But most of the time, you know, the weather is really quite pleasant out there, you know. It's like kind of like being in Hawaii, a little bit further south, about 8 or 10 degrees further south, I think. But anyway, there came a time finally, one other thing I guess I should mention is when we first got to Guam on the Sperry, there was a lot of air raids. I don't know if there was, of course, my battle station, as it happened, was in the starboard shaft alley of the ship, the deepest part of the ship there is, you know, and the farthest away from knowing what the hell's going on. So I personally, I don't know if there ever were any actual planes or whether they ever actually dropped any bombs or anything, but for the first few weeks we were there, probably the first 6 weeks, there were frequent air raids, sometimes 2 or 3 a night, you know, which really disturbed everybody's sleep a lot, you know, and because you know you all got to rush off to battle stations and all this, and the plane, there were Japanese planes supposedly coming down from the Bonans, from Iwo Jima and up in that area. And maybe that's one reason why they decided they'd better attack Iwo Jima. I don't know, but after a while they stopped, and that was the end of that. But when the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, we, of course, had no advance idea that any such thing was possible, but right away, the rumors began to circulate that, hey, you know, the war's going to be over pretty quick, and we might go to Japan, see, our ship, see. And how this rumor got started, I don't know, but it proved to be true, because our ship, the Greenlet, and the submarine tender that had replaced the Sperry, it was the Proteus, another one of the same class. The Proteus and the Greenlet were the 2 submarine support type vessels that were selected to go to Japan with we call it the invasion fleet, which of course it wasn't an invasion, but it was the one, you know, where the surrender took place and all that stuff. So we went up there and we caught the tail end of another typhoon on that trip. See, we put this huge fleet, you know, the ships came from all over, and it was a gigantic convoy, really a spectacular scene in the daytime, you know, to go up there and see all these ships as far as the eye could see, you know. And but we kind of milled around out there for several days, maybe a week, while I guess, you know, arrangements were being made. And then we came and anchored outside of Tokyo Bay at a body of water called Sagami-wan. just waited for another few days until finally went into Tokyo Bay itself, where a few days later the surrender was signed. And all.
How'd you feel sailing into Tokyo Bay?
Well, we were, everybody was a little apprehensive, I think. There was, we were at battle stations, as I remember it, not knowing that there might be mines in the water, for example, or there might be, we were well aware that the Japanese had, human torpedo type things, and some were a little bit apprehensive that there might be some sort of a trick there. But everything was dead still, perfectly quiet. And so our ship went, as I remember, directly to the Yokosuka Naval Base, a big Japanese Navy base, and tied up at a pier there before the surrender was even signed. I think our ship may have been, certainly was one of the very first ones to actually touch Japanese soil, And we tied up at the Yokosuka Naval Base, sent a crew of sailors, of which I was not one of them, ashore to kind of reconnoiter, and they came back and said that the place seems to be deserted, which indeed it was. And we're very fearful of booby traps and things like that. There were a couple of several small Japanese craft tied up at the pier where we were and anchored around, but they were all just deserted,
Didn't see any personnel?
Nobody. And later, as a story we'll tell, that was the story everywhere. It looked like the Japanese Navy, at any rate, somehow or other got the word that the show was over, and the guys just packed up their stuff and went home. Yeah. So anyway, we were there, and I got a little card here in my souvenirs that says I was present during the surrender ceremonies, And after probably a week of horsing around, or not doing much of anything really, we were given the mission. Our ship was given the mission of going around and locating, identifying any Japanese submarines that we could find, and just evaluate their situation, make sure there was nobody on them, that there was no booby traps or weapons, or that they were not a threat,
right.
and just to make an inventory. Which we did for the next, and this was really fun, We just, I don't know how we got our clues. I suppose our officers were getting reports from airplanes, or I don't know what, that, hey, it looks like a Japanese submarine is here or something.
Did you get on board any of the Japanese submarines?
Not me personally. We sent guys on board, though. But that's what we do. We'd go to some little out-of-the-way Japanese harbor, or sometimes it was just an empty harbor, other times it would be a city of some sort with a pier there, and here'd be a submarine, and our guys would go and look around, and in every case they found it was just deserted, and we went to the place where they had all the human torpedo type things, and there were scores of them, God, maybe hundreds of them.
Really?
It's kind of weird, And we sort of worked our way down through the inland sea and down the east coast of Honshu and through the Bungo, Suido, around to the west coast of Kyushu to the Sasebo. That's a big Japanese naval base there. And we went in there. There was a couple submarines there. We checked them out, and we stayed there for a number of weeks. And then, because our job of checking out the submarines was apparently over. I was just an engine room coolie. I didn't really understand all the thing, but apparently that mission had been accomplished.
Did you get on shore?
Yeah, yeah, went to Nagasaki as a matter of fact. Yeah, which was not far away, probably 20, 30 miles away.
What was that like?
It was awful, really awful. Just,
Now, what do you
just
think
like
of
the picture.
the radiation? You just
That's
weren't,
it.
weren't even aware of it.
Yeah, we just went down there, and there was very few people of any kind there, but there were Japanese people around there living in the ruins, you know, and we went down there, and nobody ever said anything about it. Look out for radiation. I don't know whether the area had been checked out or not, you know. But anyway, yeah, we got ashore, you know. But it was, most of the places we went were just in ruins, just really awful, terrible, you know. And the people were in desperate shape, you know, just awful. So
Yeah.
we felt sorry.
Any interaction with the population, or is that?
Yeah, we, you know, they would, there were, you know, people would come up and speak English, you know.
Really?
Yeah, they would want to practice their English, you know. And I remember one case where I told somebody that we were submarine sailors or something like that. Boy, their reaction was one of horror, I think, you know. Our submarines really did a number, you know. I mean, these were seaport cities.
Yeah.
Probably had lots and lots of, you know, their people who had been sunk by American submarines, you know.
So how long did you have occupation duty?
Well, we stayed there, I'm trying to think, until about, it must have been about the 1st of December.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a little earlier than that, might have been in November. See, the bombs were dropped in August. I think the surrender itself was about the 1st of September, thereabouts. So we were there September, October, maybe part of November.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were given next to the last mission, I guess, which was quite interesting. There were 3 big Japanese submarines that were capable of carrying airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason the Navy wanted to study them further and so on and so forth. So our mission was to escort them back to Pearl Harbor. What they did was, the submarines, this is while we were in Sasebo, and the tender, the Proteus, was still up in Tokyo Bay. It was in Yokosuka, as a matter of fact. These 3 submarines were brought up to Yokosuka, to the Proteus, cleaned up, checked out, made sure that they were seaworthy, and crew members, you know, these relief crew guys off of the Proteus were trained to operate these Japanese submarines. See? Yeah, and when all was in, and all this was taking place, and we didn't know about it. We were down in Sasebo doing our thing. But when all was in readiness, we went up to Yokosuka, and our little flotilla, us and the 3 Japanese submarines, steamed out for Pearl Harbor. See, and we escorted. They stayed on the surface all the time, you know.
Did you talk to any of the guys that were? Crew?
No, never talked to them. Strangely enough, see. That must have been an adventure for those guys, though, you know. But I remember we had to refuel at sea, which was the first time we'd ever done it. It's a long haul from Tokyo to Pearl Harbor nonstop. See. But we did that.
So you were happy to see Pearl, I'm sure?
Oh yeah. So we stayed in Pearl and had a big time, as you can well imagine, for several weeks. And then we got one more chore to do. There was a ship in Pearl Harbor. It was what's called an APA, a troop transport, that had struck a mine, and its engine room was flooded. I had no idea how long, when this happened or where or whatever, but it was there in Pearl Harbor with a flooded engine room, disabled. And we were given the job of towing that thing back to San Francisco. which we did. It's 2,100 miles and it took 30 days. 30 days.
It was a slow trip.
It was damn slow. If you've been to the Hawaiian Islands, you know they got the northeast trade winds come up every day, and that's blowing from San Francisco towards the Hawaiian Islands. And you know, you're bucking, this thing is, the ship is empty. Our target is, or our tow is empty. It's high in the water. It's a pretty good sized ship, and we're bucking the wind and the tide all the way, and just hammering away at full power for 30 days non-stop. It seemed to take forever. Yeah. But finally we sailed into the Golden Gate. And, so,
Must have been quite a sight.
oh yeah, I think I got a picture of that. Then you may remember they had this point system for getting guys out of service. I knew there was just a matter of a few weeks, you know. So I guess we made one trip down to San Diego and back for, I don't know what reason, just for the hell of it, I guess, you know. And then we tied up at Treasure Island, San Francisco Bay, which was a Navy base at the time. And I got discharged. Well, I left the ship there, and I was sent to Puget Sound Navy Yard at Bremerton for discharge.
Mm-hmm.
So I rode the train up there and went to the Navy Yard. When you got discharged, they gave you fare to home. I got I think it was 50 cents, because it's a ferry. It's a short ferry ride from Bremerton over to Bainbridge Island. Yeah.
What was the reception by the family like?
Well, they were happy to see me, and I was happy to see them. It was just, at the time, it was just my mother and father and my sister. I had a brother who was in the Marines. He was still in the Marines at the time. He got out a couple of months later. But yeah, it was a joyous reunion. I had not been home since Christmas of 1943.
So what did you do when you got home?
Well, when I left the ship, I remember this distinctly. When I left the ship in Treasure Island, I stepped off and I says, I'm never going to set foot in another engine room as long as I live. So I got home and I'd raised hell for several weeks, got drunk, went and saw my buddies, you know, and all that stuff, bought some civilian clothes, and, you know, all that stuff. And then I didn't have any money, so I went around looking for a job. I got a couple of jobs that were just manual labor type jobs, and I was not in good shape, as it turned out. You know, working 2 years in the tropics in the engine room of a ship, hardly any, you know, as it turned out, I was not in good physical condition, and I wasn't very robust. It's still am not, you know. Anyway, I quickly discovered that, boy, the kind of work that was available to me at that time was tough. On the other hand, I could get work in the engine room of a ferry boat and make pretty good money. So despite my vow of a few weeks earlier, I pretty soon found myself back in the engine room of a ferry boat. And for the next 2 years, probably, I kind of oscillated between. I soon found that my Navy experience was indeed good. I really knew my stuff. I was a hell of a lot better engineer than most of the chief engineers that I sailed with, you know, really. And I found that without too much effort, I could get myself a license as a merchant marine engineer officer, which I did, see. So I had no trouble getting a job as an engineer, you know, like that. And so I did. It was fun, you know. I worked on the ferry boats, I worked on a tugboat, but the best thing of all was I worked on yachts, charter yachts. Those great big yachts, you know, going to Alaska and places like that, party time, you know. It was really great, see, for a young guy, 21 years old, you know. And so I started out doing nothing but that. But after a while, I said, well, geez, this is not really the way I'd like to spend this whole life. And I started thinking about the GI Bill, education and so on. After all, I had been a good student years before in high school. So I started going to the University of Washington on the GI Bill, and I gradually did less and less of going to sea and more of going to the university until finally, after about 2 years after I got out of the Navy, I finally quit that life altogether and became a full-time student.
Did you, was it hard adjusting after coming home, civilian life?
I don't, well, you know, there were things that I thought was, you know, this is baloney, you know, and this is, that I thought just didn't appeal to me about things that I saw, you know, and the attitudes of people and so forth. But I didn't, you know, I didn't feel like I was a victim or a misfit or anything of that nature. No, not at all. And I, you know, I was having a good time. I mean, God, I hadn't gone out with girls for 2 years, you know.
Making up for lost time.
Yeah, go out and drink and carouse around anytime you want to. I was making about, damn near $1 an hour in the engine rooms. That was pretty good money in those days, you know. So.
Once you graduated, what did you do?
Well, I went to work for GE. My plan was this, see. When I graduated, I went to the University of Washington in Seattle. And when I didn't want to leave that part of the country, you know. But the big employer in that area then as now is Boeing, see. Well, Boeing happened to be in a big down cycle at the time, just like they are right now, and there weren't any jobs, see. So I thought, well, I had to have a job. I didn't have any money, you know. So I took a job with GE, and of course that meant coming to the East Coast. And my plan was, I said, I'll go back east, I'll get some money, I'll get something on my resume, things will improve out here, and then I'll quit GE and come back out to God's country here, see. Well, that never happened. Never happened.
Now, how would you summarize your military experience?
Well, I'd say it was a great adventure, you know, that's how I would summarize it, yeah. Didn't feel like I had made any great sacrifice or, you know, done anything out of the ordinary. It was a great adventure as far as I was. At the time, of course, a lot of it was, you know, I wished I was someplace else, but, you know, I didn't never felt that I was in any terrifying, life-threatening situations, and, you know, never saw any combat, you know, in the usual sense, and so.
Well, thank you. You have some pictures we can take a look at?
Yeah. Let's see. It's not all. That's not full of them. I got maybe 4 or 5 pages.
Okay, Wayne can zoom in on them.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Now we're getting to this stuff. Yeah, well, I can start. I guess you would probably start about right here and go for the next 4 or 5 pages, and I'll explain anything that.
Okay. You're on a tank? Oh, you were at Saipan?
No, this was some guy who had been to Saipan
Okay.
gave me that picture.
Okay. Home on leave, Christmas 1943.
Yeah, I can hold the book if
Let's see. That's a superstructure for
Japanese battleship.
Nagata.
Yeah,
That
the
was
Japanese.
big
That's
ship.
a big battleship. Yeah, yeah. We anchored right close to it at one point. I think I have another picture of it somewhere. There's that. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. And there's that thing about being present at the surrender.
Okay, that's good right there.
How's that? There's the Nagata.
Yeah.
And this is, it says USS Piedmont.
Yeah, okay, that's a destroyer. It just happened to be a ship in the picture, I guess. There's the submarine, the Japanese.
Okay. Japanese submarines. South Dakota.
This is the auditorium too.
And these Japanese sailors' hat bands?
Yeah, yeah. I bought it in a little store.
Uh-huh. There we go.
Double left click on that gold sheet at the bottom. You'll get a Norton box. It'll say live update. Click on that. It only brings you down the current signature copy.
Okay, thank you.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, you're entirely welcome.
We have a little paperwork.
Okay.
These